About a year ago, I shared a video on my process for rendering art, tips on rendering your art, and today I kind of want to share an updated version of that video because I've learned a thing or two in the last year or so about rendering. I just want to share some extra tips with you guys, especially if you are new to digital art and you want to get that sort of painterly concept artist type of look. I think these tips will really help. I think one of the most important parts of rendering is to always try and get a combination of hard and soft edges, especially when you are first getting started with digital art. I think it's really easy to try and over blend everything, and you get this very airbrush look, and it's not really that painterly type of look because there's really no texture to it, right? Like everything is smooth. You really want to have texture to convey, texture of the skin and texture in the clothes and the hair. Like all of these things have their own texture, and whenever you make everything soft and airbrushed, it doesn't really convey that. So there's a few ways that I like to go about getting those hard and soft edges. And the first way is by picking the right brush. So you can use just a basic round brush for this. You just want a brush that has like a hard edge, but you can also control with the pen pressure. So if you just press gently, it'll be a lot more softer. And then what I'll do is I'll use that round brush, and then whenever I am trying to get some more softer edges, I'll actually take the smudge tool and just kind of smudge along the edges to get that softer look. We don't want to smudge out all of our hard edges. We want to leave some of those because that'll help give interest and also give a little bit of texture. Whenever you are painting shadows, it's really important to know when to use hard edge shadows and when to use soft edge shadows. And part of this just comes with looking at reference and experience. Like the more that you do this, the more you'll be able to recognize which is which. But if you look at a reference, if there's a harsh light on them, usually you'll get a lot of cast shadows. So the nose, for example, there'll be a cast shadow that typically gives a very harsh line. And that's where you would want to use hard edge shadows. But along the cheek, which is a lot softer, you wouldn't want to really use a hard edge. You would probably use a soft edge there, right? There's really no hard and fast rule about where to put hard and soft edges. Kind of just comes with experience, and the more that you do it, the more you'll learn. So another way that you can get a hard and soft edge is you can actually take the lasso tool, use an airbrush or something with a soft edge, and don't fill it all the way up, but you'll just paint along the edge of the selection, and that way you'll get a hard edge on one side and a soft edge on the other side. That's another quick way to get that effect. So another thing, whenever I'm rendering, I always try to keep my rendering on a separate layer. And the reason I do this is so that I can turn that layer on and off. I can kind of see the progress that I'm making, so you can kind of get an idea of what direction your painting is headed. And if I ever feel like I have over rendered a spot, because that happens all the time, I'll just erase it and then restart it and try it again. Whenever you keep your rendering on a separate layer like this, it makes it a lot easier to sort of make those changes and just kind of check your progress and see how it's coming along. And whenever I'm rendering, I'm making sure that I am spending most of my time in the focal point area. In most of my paintings, it's usually the face. That's where I want the viewer to look. So that's my focal point, and I'll spend a lot of my time there. And whenever I do this, it puts a lot more emphasis in that area and less emphasis in the other areas. In this Rapunzel painting I did recently, you can see at the bottom, it's a lot less rendered. There's hardly any attention paid there in comparison to where her face is and the hair around her face. All of that, I put a lot more attention and detail there because that's where I want you to look when you first look at this painting. And so that's just a cool way to sort of, not only does it add contrast, it's just more visually appealing for our eyes and our brain. Because if everything is equally rendered, our eyes just don't really know where to look. It's a lot more boring. So if you can have contrast here, it just makes it more interesting and it helps emphasize that focal point. Something else that I've started doing with rendering is adding more cool colors to my warm shadows. This one kind of gets into color theory a little bit. It just helps make the painting a little bit more cohesive when you have these cool colors right beside these warm colors. And so what I'll do is just take a cool blue or purple and just lightly paint over one of my shadow areas. And then I'll actually color pick that new color that's on the canvas and use that color to sort of shade in some of the areas of my shadows. And you can see it makes a big difference. It just kind of helps elevate the painting a little bit and just makes it like just feel more lively. I guess, like, I don't know how to describe it, but it just helps make it look a little bit better. And it's a really, like, it's a pretty simple trick to do, and I think it adds a lot to the painting overall. And speaking of shadows, another thing that I have found really important is to always darken your shadows. I, for some reason, struggle with this. I feel like I never darken my shadows enough. Like, I always will look back at a painting after I finished it, and I'll look at it and be like, I could have darkened those shadows more. And that's kind of how I feel about this Rapunzel painting, is I did darken the shadows, and I'll show you again like a before and after without the dark shadows and then with the dark shadows. And you can see like what a difference it makes. But again, I feel like I could have darkened them even more. It would have had an even bigger impact. It just helps give it a little bit more interest because you're adding a little bit more contrast between the colors and the values. I always try to add some texture to my painting, so I try to save this for towards the end of the rendering process because I found that whenever I add texture early on, I always end up painting over most of it and it kind of goes to waste. So if you want to try adding texture to your painting, I recommend saving it for towards the end. I found that this actually helps me be more deliberate with my texture because everything else is kind of done. So I kind of know where I want the texture to go. And that way I'm not like painting over all of that texture too. I can be a little bit more like strategic and deliberate with it. I do use a lot of texture brushes from just various brush packs that I've picked up over the years, but the texture brushes that Procreate comes with are actually really good, I think. You can get some of these same effects with the basic brushes that come with Procreate. And kind of along the same lines as texture, I recommend saving those cool effects that you want to add to a painting for towards the end or after you finish rendering. Just because if you forget to add something or you want to make some sort of change, it is so much easier to not worry about any of those cool effects. So if you add like a glowy effect or you blur or chromatic aberration or anything like that, if you do that like early on in your rendering process, it's so much harder to paint around that. So it's a lot easier if you just save that for after you render, and that way you can just have it to itself and it be sort of like a finishing touch. I used to do that all the time. Like, I have finally gotten to a point, I think I've just been like burned badly enough that I finally stopped doing stuff too early. Those things are like my favorite part of the painting process. So sometimes I'm very impatient and I just like want to get to that part, you know, as soon as possible. But it really, really helps if you are patient and just save it for the end, because you are going to save yourself so much time and effort not having to like worry about painting around it or covering it up or any of that stuff. Just save it for the end. If you want to see more about those like cool effects that I like to do to sort of elevate a painting and take it like just a little bit further, you can check out this video that I have. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed the video and I will see you in the next one.